This commenter would like to know why I don't think the story of Adam and Eve is true, and this seems like an earnest question asked in good faith, so I'm happy to answer. I don't think the story of Adam and Eve is true because instead, I think it's a myth. And I think it's a myth for a number of reasons. Chief among them, I think the Bible presents it as a myth. It has all the defining characteristics of mythic literature. It's set a long time ago at the origin of things, deep in the primordial past. It has these fantastical elements like a talking animal and a magic tree. And it ultimately serves an etiological function. That is to say, it explains something, the origin of something, in the social world of its original audience. Namely, it explains why life is so hard. It explains why women and children die in childbirth. It explains why people have to work so hard just to feed themselves. It explains why people die. It explains why there is some distance between us and God. And it explains it in a way that an ancient audience can both understand and resonate with on an existential level. Now, if a story looks like a myth and quacks like a myth, then it's probably a myth. And the value of myths is not in their literal and historical truth. I also don't think the editor of the book of Genesis thinks that the value of the story is in its literal or historical truth, because the editor of the Adam and Eve story in Genesis chapter 2 and 3 juxtaposed that story with Genesis chapter 1. And the story of creation in Genesis chapter 1 and the story of creation in Genesis chapter 2 and 3 flatly contradict each other in the order of creation. In Genesis chapter 1, animals are created before mankind, men and women created simultaneously in a somewhat egalitarian fashion. And then Genesis chapter 2, Adam is created first by himself. Animals are only created after that as an attempt to satiate his loneliness. And then Eve is only created still later after that. This is an irreconcilable contradiction. And if two things contradict each other, then they can't both literally and historically be true at the same time and in the same way. So whoever put the book of Genesis together and combined these two originally independent creation stories apparently did not value them for their literal and historical truth. And this is, of course, leaving aside the fact that virtually every science that we have access to that's capable of making accurate predictions about past states of affairs indicates that this is not the way that human beings originated. We did not come out of Mesopotamia descended from a single couple 6,000 years ago. That's simply false. Sometimes Christian readers of the Bible are very disturbed to hear the possibility that Adam and Eve did not exist because it messes with their theology of sin and salvation. If Adam did not sin, then what's the point of Jesus? They will sometimes ask me. And when people ask me this question, I simply direct them back to the Gospels. Adam is not an essential component of any of Jesus' preaching about sin and salvation. Adam is mentioned once obliquely in a teaching about divorce, but otherwise, Jesus is perfectly capable in all four Gospels, which otherwise don't agree with each other on much, perfectly capable in all these Gospels of preaching about his own significance without ever having to mention Adam and Eve. So the entire story of sin and salvation is capable of being articulated without reference to Adam and Eve. So this is one instance where you can literally just do what the little bracelet says, do what Jesus did, and construct your theology of sin and salvation without reference to Adam. You've lost absolutely nothing by losing the literal and historical truth of Genesis chapters 2 and 3.